He was not supposed to be there that day. The Senate meeting on the 15th of March, 44 BC, had almost been cancelled. Caesar had been warned, not once, many times and from many directions. His wife Calpurnia had dreamed of his murder and begged him to stay home. A soothsayer named Spurina had warned him weeks earlier to beware the Ides of March. A letter detailing the entire conspiracy had been pressed into his hand as he walked to the Theatre of Pompey, where the Senate was meeting that day while the Curia was under renovation. He took the letter, but didn't read it. He was still holding it when they killed him. Why he went anyway is one of the enduring mysteries of his life. Perhaps he didn't believe the warnings. Perhaps he believed them and didn't care. Perhaps he had simply grown so accustomed to being the most dangerous man in any room that the idea of genuine physical threat had become abstract to him. He had survived Gaul, survived civil war, survived a dozen battles where the outcome had been genuinely uncertain. He had been captured by pirates as a young man, cheerfully socialized with them during his captivity, and upon his release, immediately raised a fleet, hunted them down, and had them crucified. He was not a man who frightened easily. Or perhaps, and this is the reading some ancient historians preferred, he was tired. He was 55 years old, which was genuinely old by Roman standards. He suffered from epilepsy. He had spent the better part of 20 years in almost constant motion, campaigning, fighting, governing, maneuvering, and the work was never finished. There was always another enemy, another problem, another war that needed his personal attention. He had recently been planning a massive campaign against Parthia to avenge Crassus and secure Rome's eastern frontier. More years of fighting, more years away from Rome, more years of the machine running at full speed. Maybe he simply walked into the Senate that morning because he had decided, consciously or not, that he was done being careful. He arrived at the Theatre of Pompey. There is a grim irony in that. The man who had defeated Pompey being killed in a building that bore his name, and took his seat. The conspirators had distributed themselves around him carefully, naturally, without arousing suspicion. There were 23 of them. Some were men Caesar had defeated in the Civil War and then pardoned, elevated, given positions of trust. Some were old allies who had grown alarmed at his increasing power. Some were genuine idealists who believed sincerely in the Republic and what it stood for. And some were men with personal grievances dressed up as principal. That is usually the way with conspiracies. Their leader, or at least the man who had organized and driven the plot, was Gaius Cassius Longinus. Sharp, practical, intensely political, Cassius had fought against Caesar at Pharsalus and been pardoned. He had watched Caesar accumulate power and concluded, correctly, that the Republic was finished unless something drastic happened. He had recruited carefully, prioritizing men of standing whose participation would give the conspiracy legitimacy. The most important recruit was Marcus Junius Brutus. Brutus was the great-great-great-grandson, through various adoptions and family connections, of the Lucius Junius Brutus who had expelled the Tarquins and founded the Republic. That ancestry was not incidental. It was the point. If this Brutus joined the conspiracy, it wasn't just a murder, it was a symbolic act of restoration. The descendant of Rome's liberator liberating Rome again. Cassius understood the power of symbols. Brutus was also Caesar's friend. More than a friend, Caesar had loved Brutus's mother Servilia for decades, in an affair that was one of the worst-kept secrets in Rome. He had shown Brutus particular favor and affection throughout his life. There were Romans who whispered, and ancient historians who recorded the whisper, that Brutus might actually be Caesar's son. The math was possible, if not certain. Brutus joined the conspiracy because he believed in the Republic, or because Cassius persuaded him he did, or because anonymous notes began appearing on his praetor's chair and on the statue of his famous ancestor, reading things like, "Brutus, are you sleeping?" and "You are not the real Brutus." The line between genuine conviction and manufactured pressure is not always visible from the outside. There had been debate among the conspirators about whether to kill Mark Antony as well. Antony was Caesar's most loyal lieutenant, physically powerful, politically connected, and the kind of man who would not take his patron's murder quietly. Brutus argued against it. One killing could be justified as tyrannicide, a noble act with ancient precedent. Two killings started to look like a coup. Brutus wanted this to be understood as liberation, not revolution. Antony would be spared. This decision would haunt him. Back in the Theatre of Pompey, a conspirator named Julius Caesar approached Caesar with a petition, a request to recall his brother from exile. Caesar had refused this petition before. He refused it again. Cimber grabbed Caesar's toga with both hands, pulling it down from his shoulder. The signal. Publius Servilius Casca struck first, from behind, a glancing blow to the neck or shoulder. Caesar grabbed Casca's arm and drove a stylus, a writing instrument, what he happened to have in his hand, into it. He stood up. He may have said something. Then the rest of them were on him. 23 men, in a tight space, all trying to strike at once. The frenzy was such that several of the conspirators wounded each other in the chaos. Caesar was stabbed 23 times. Later examination, conducted by a physician named Antistius in what may be the earliest recorded forensic autopsy in history, determined that only one wound had been fatal. The others were, in the grim arithmetic of the situation, superfluous. At some point during the attack, Caesar pulled his toga over his face. The sources disagree on exactly when and why. Some say he did it at the end to die with dignity, covering his face so he would not be seen in the moment of death. Some say he did it when he saw Brutus among the attackers, that the sight of Brutus was the blow that broke him. The famous line, "Et tu, Brute," comes from Shakespeare, not from Roman sources, though the historian Suetonius records that some said Caesar spoke Greek in his final moments. Kai su, teknon. You too, child. Whether he said it or not, the image lodged itself permanently in the human imagination. The great man, seeing the face of the friend he had trusted, and understanding in that moment that it was over. Not just the fighting, everything. He fell at the base of a statue of Pompey. The conspirators had planned their next moves carefully. They would march to the Forum, display their daggers, announce the death of the tyrant, and be received as liberators. The Senate would rally to them. Rome would understand what had been done and why. None of it happened. The Senate fled in panic before the conspirators could speak. The streets of Rome, when the news spread, did not fill with celebration. They filled with confusion, then fear, then anger. The Roman people had loved Caesar, genuinely loved him, the way urban populations love leaders who give them grain distributions and public games and the feeling that someone powerful is on their side. The conspirators had killed a man. They had not killed an idea. Mark Antony, who had been kept away from the theater by a conspirator who detained him in conversation outside, was very much alive and very much in possession of Caesar's will and Caesar's private papers, which he had obtained from Calpurnia in the hours after the murder. He had also obtained Caesar's body. The funeral was held in the Forum. Antony gave the eulogy. Ancient sources describe it as one of the most devastating pieces of oratory ever delivered, reading Caesar's will aloud, which left money and gardens to the Roman people, displaying Caesar's blood-stained toga pointing to each wound, working the crowd from grief to fury with a skill that Cicero, the greatest orator of the age, later acknowledged with something close to professional horror. The crowd seized Caesar's body and burned it in the Forum, tearing up benches and market stalls to build an impromptu pyre. Then they took the torches and went looking for the conspirators. Brutus and Cassius fled Rome within days. They would spend the next 2 years raising armies in the east, preparing for the war they now knew was coming. Antony consolidated power in Rome, forming an alliance with Caesar's great-nephew and adopted heir, a young man of 19 named Gaius Octavius, who had been studying quietly in Apollonia when the news of his uncle's death reached him. Octavius crossed to Italy immediately, landed without an army, and began, with a calm calculation that nobody his age should have possessed, the process of collecting what Caesar had left him. He called himself Caesar. He would eventually be called something else. But that comes later. The conspirators met the Caesarian forces at Philippi in Macedonia in 42 BC. 2 battles. Cassius, losing his portion of the first engagement and mistakenly believing the whole battle was lost, killed himself. Brutus won his portion of the first battle, but lost the second. He too fell on his sword, assisted by a friend who held the blade while Brutus walked into it. Antony, standing over Brutus's body afterward, reportedly called him the noblest Roman of them all, the only one among the conspirators who had acted from genuine belief rather than personal interest. Whether that was true is impossible to know. What is true is that it made no practical difference. The republic that Brutus had killed Caesar to save was gone. It had been gone, arguably, before the first knife fell. The institutions were still there, the titles, the forms, but the substance had been hollowing out for a century, and no amount of stabbing could put it back. Rome was an empire now. It just hadn't decided yet who the emperor was going to be. That argument had two candidates, and it would take another decade and another civil war and the most famous love story in ancient history before it was finally settled.